Hi, I'm Eric Rosenfeld, and in the next few minutes you're going to discover everything you need to know to upgrade your door casings. Even if you're an inexperienced do-it-yourselfer, if you follow the steps that we're outlining here today, you'll be able to create a beautiful new look for your doors, and you'll be able to tell your friends that you did it yourself. So you're ready to get started, but first you have to decide what type of molding you'd like to choose. How thick, how wide, what type of profile would look best in your home. One thing to consider, if you're going to install baseboard or chair rail, be sure to select a door trim that is thicker than these other moldings. For example, if we put this chair rail up to the existing trim, the end is exposed, so pick casing that is thicker and will support the opposing molding. Okay, so we've chosen our molding. We want to make sure that it's wider than the existing trim because when we tear this out, it's going to leave a little bit of wall damage and we don't want to have to deal with too much touch-up. So as you can see, this molding is a little bit wider. It'll cover it right up, make our lives a lot easier. Now let's go ahead and tear out this trim. Now before we rip the existing door casing out, we have to do a little damage control. On both sides of the door casing, it has been caulked to conceal the seam between the molding and the wall. If we tear the molding out as is, it is going to peel off that caulking along with some paint. Using this utility knife, we're going to cut into the caulk all along the leading edges of the existing trim. Once it's cut, it's real easy to remove the old casings with a hammer and chisel. Now that we've removed the old trim, it's time to clean up a bit. We've got some brads that are sticking out of the wall and some old caulking that needs to be removed. That way when we lay the new casing in, it will lay flush against the wall. Before we start installing our door trim, let's go over a few of the tools that we'll need for the job. First, well, you could use a hand saw, but a miter saw is a lot more precise in cutting our molding. This is a compound miter, but a basic miter saw will do the job just fine. A hammer and nails will also work, but we prefer to use a finished nail gun and air compressor. Just makes the job go a lot easier. In our finished nail gun, we'll be using 1 1/4 inch brads, and we're going to set our air compressor at about 100 psi. Now, there will be other tools that we'll be explaining as the project moves along, but for now, let's go inside and get started. Remember how I said this would be easy? You don't even need a tape measure for this project. To determine where to make your cuts on your new door trim, just put it in place and put a pencil mark at the point where the old door trim was removed. 1 mark for the right piece, 1 mark for the left piece, and 2 marks for the top piece. Okay, come on, let's go make our cuts. 4 easy cuts is all it will take for this doorway. However, even on a quick job like this, remember, safety first. When cutting pieces for a door frame, it's good to remember that the outside of the molding, the thicker part, should always be longer than the inside, the tapered part. This will help you determine which direction to angle your saw blade. For this left piece on our doorway, we're going to point our saw to the left at 45 degrees and make our cut at the mark. For the right piece of the doorway, we're going to point our saw to the right, once again at a 45-degree angle, double checking to make sure that after our cut is made, the outside of the door trim will be the longer part. For the left side of the top piece, we're going to have the saw blade pointed to the right once again at a 45-degree angle. Now if your hand's a little too close to the blade for comfort, you can always flip your molding around and get the same exact cut. And for the right side of the top piece, you're going to have the saw blade pointed to the left, you guessed it, at a 45-degree angle. Now, don't worry about memorizing the direction of the blade. Just always cut to where the outside of the molding will be the longest. It's that simple. Now that we've cut our molding, we're almost ready to nail it in place. There is one obstacle, however, the plate for the light switch. The new molding we are using is wider and will cover a bit of the plate. There are two options for how to deal with this. We can either cut the plate to where it will just butt up against the molding, or we can use a utility knife to remove a bit from the back of the molding. We've decided to trim the molding since it just barely covers the plate. Put the molding in place and mark the area to be trimmed with a pencil. Watch how easy this is to do because I'm using a polyurethane molding. There, it's done, and we're ready to install our pieces. To help make our installation easier, we will be using premium polyurethane construction adhesive, which is available at most hardware stores. Adhesive isn't required, but it allows us to use only a few nails, which reduces the amount of time we spend when doing our finish work. We're applying just a thin bead of adhesive along the flat inner part of the molding, and then we're going to put it in place. When you're installing your molding, select a spot that will best conceal your nail holes. On this profile, it has a nice curve near the outside, and we're going to use that for our primary nailing area. We secured the molding in place with a nail every 12 to 18 inches, but we didn't put any nails in the top 2 feet of the molding. We want to leave enough room to make adjustments that will fit well with the top piece of the door casing. Once again, we apply adhesive to the inner part of the molding. We are also going to apply a small amount of adhesive between the joint on this piece and our first piece. When we put it into place, we're going to check to make sure the joints line up perfectly. Often you will find, as is true in this case, that the door jamb isn't straight and you may have to make adjustments. Before we line up that joint, we're going to shoot a brad into the top of the molding to hold it into place. When working with wood, you would typically use a shim to fix an issue like this. You can do the same with polyurethane, but since we are using adhesive to keep the joint permanently in place, all we really need is a temporary spacer. By folding up a piece of cardboard and compressing it into the size of the spacer we need, we can make this adjustment within a minute. Since the outside portion of this bottom piece is too low, we are going to put the spacer behind it to bring it into alignment with the top piece. With it aligned, we can go ahead and secure the upper portion of this piece, as well as the left side of our top piece. All right, we're ready to put up the last piece. Add the adhesive to the inner portion and put a bit on the edge that will touch the top piece and put it in place. Hey, we got lucky. This part of the door jamb is straight and we don't need to make any adjustments. Since this piece lines up perfectly, we can go ahead and secure it in place. Construction complete. So for a brief recap, we ripped out the old door trim, which takes about 5 minutes. We measured, cut, and installed our new door trim, which will take you anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. And now we're ready to do the finish work. If you remember, we used the adhesive to reduce the number of nails by about half, so we won't have to spend much time patching these holes. You'll get the best result by applying a small amount of spackling over the hole, allowing it to dry, and then lightly sanding it with a fine grit piece of sandpaper. The spackling also works well on the joints. Caulking can also be used for holes in joints, but it shrinks when it dries and will leave a little divot in the hole. Caulking is great though for hiding the seams between the molding and the wall. It can get a little messy if you aren't careful, so let's take a look at a few tricks. The most important thing is to cut the tip with the right angle and size. Too high or low on the caulking tube will cause an improper flow, and cutting the tube flat at the end will just create a mess. We're going to cut the tube at about a 30-degree angle. With constant pressure on the tube, we just run it down the molding. Notice how the tip of the tube is forcing the caulking into the seam. We do this on both the outer part of the door trim and the inner part of the door trim. We could have painted the molding in advance and then just done touch-up painting at the end, but with this small of a project, it's often easier to just paint it as the final step. Using painter's tape, we tape off the wall and the inner part of the door jamb. Apply paint, and voila, your project is complete. It's easy to do with just a few basic tools, and once you're done, you have the satisfaction of knowing you did it yourself. For complete step-by-step videos on a variety of projects, or to purchase the perfect moldings for your home, visit udecor.com.